The rain came down hard on Chicago that night, the kind of rain that had weight to it, that pressed against the windows and turned the street outside into a dark mirror, reflecting nothing worth seeing. It was 2 in the morning, the kind of hour that belonged to insomniacs and truck drivers and people who had run out of better options. Eleanor Voss was all three. She moved the cloth across the counter for the third time, not because it needed it, but because stopping meant thinking and thinking at 2 in the morning in a place like this led nowhere good. The bleach smell burned the back of her throat. The coffee smell never left. Not really. It had soaked into the walls and the ceiling tiles and probably into her skin by now. She had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of traffic when you live near a highway. It simply became the texture of her life. Harlan's Diner. Open 24 hours. The sign outside buzzed and flickered in the rain, one letter darker than the rest, the kind of maintenance that never got scheduled because there was always something more urgent. Eleanor had worked here for 2 years. She knew every crack in the linoleum, every booth that wobbled, every regular who came in before sunrise because they had nowhere else to be. She was 26 years old. She told herself that was not old. She told herself that every morning when the alarm went off, and every night when she counted what was left after rent, and the bus pass, and the 2 medications she bought in half doses to stretch the prescription. She told herself there was still time, still some open road ahead of her that she simply had not reached yet. Most days she almost believed it. The bell above the door rang. Eleanor turned with the automatic smile already arranged on her face, the one that cost nothing, and paid back even less, and the words of greeting died somewhere between her brain and her mouth. He stood in the doorway. The rain had not touched him, or if it had decided not to leave marks. The coat was black and long, and the kind of garment that existed in a different financial atmosphere than anything Eleanor had ever owned. Dark hair cut with the kind of deliberate carelessness that takes actual effort to achieve. He was not tall in a way that announced itself, but he filled the doorway all the same, the way certain men fill whatever space they occupy, as though the room reorganized itself slightly to accommodate them. Behind him, 2 men stepped in. They were not there to eat. Eleanor understood that immediately, the way you understand certain things without being told, the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds arrive. Their eyes moved across the diner in a slow, practiced sweep. Their hands rested near the front of their jackets in a way that was casual and was not casual at all. The trucker at table 6 put down his fork. Maria, who owned the diner and was usually impossible to rattle, stopped mid-pour and stood with the coffee pot suspended in the air as though she had forgotten it existed. The whole room held its breath. Eleanor did not hold hers. She finished wiping the counter, set down the cloth, and reached for the coffee pot. She moved to the far end of the counter where a fresh cup was waiting and filled it without asking. Then she turned and placed it in front of the empty stool directly across from her. She looked at him. He was already looking at her. His eyes were dark, the kind of dark that does not reflect light so much as absorb it. They moved across her face in a way that was not the way men usually looked at waitresses sizing up whether to bother. This was different. It was the look of someone who was actually reading something, actually processing what they saw, rather than filtering it through whatever they wanted to see. Most people looked through Eleanor. This man looked at her. He moved to the counter. His shoes were polished leather that clicked against the linoleum, a sound that did not belong in this place, and he sat down on the stool with the unhurried ease of someone who was comfortable in every environment because he had decided to be. He looked at the coffee. Then he looked at her. Black, she said. It was not a question. She had already poured it black. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more contained. His voice when he spoke was quiet and controlled and carried a weight that had nothing to do with volume. There was something in the way the syllables formed, something European in the architecture of it, Italian in the structure, though the accent had been worn smooth by years somewhere else. "You are nervous," he said. Not a question, an observation. "I am fine," Eleanor said. The lie tasted like the bleach smell, familiar and not particularly pleasant. He wrapped his fingers around the cup. Long fingers, a silver ring on the right hand, and the knuckles. She noticed the knuckles. They were scarred in the way that spoke of old violence, old damage, the kind that had healed but left its record behind. Hands that had done things the rest of him was careful to keep covered. Fighter's hands in a gentleman's coat. "What is your name?" he said. "Eleanor." She cleared her throat. Eleanor. He repeated it slowly, testing the weight of it in his mouth, the way you test the temperature of something before you commit to it. Eleanor. He paused. You work here often, every day, double shifts mostly. His eyes narrowed just slightly. That is exhausting. It is life. One of the men behind him leaned forward and said something low and urgent near his ear. The man at the counter raised one hand, a single unhurried gesture, and the voice stopped immediately. The silence that followed was the kind that told you everything you needed to know about the nature of the relationship between those three men. How much do you make, he said. Heat moved up Eleanor's neck. That is not really any of your concern. Humor me. Something in the way he said it suggested that humoring him was not actually optional. Eleanor set her jaw. With tips maybe 2,000 a month. On a good month. He did not laugh. He did not offer sympathy. He did not do anything performative at all. He simply watched her with those absorbing eyes, and she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her worn uniform or the black marker she had used to cover the hole in her left shoe. He was seeing something she had not shown anyone. Is that enough, he said? It has to be. That is not an answer. Her throat tightened. Behind her, she could feel Maria's attention like a second presence listening without appearing to listen. No, Eleanor said quietly. It is never enough. He set down the cup, reached into his coat. For one cold second, her body went still in a very specific way. Then he pulled out a wallet, black leather, thick, soft as cloth, and laid several bills on the counter between the sugar packets and the ketchup. $500. That is too much, Eleanor said immediately. For the coffee, he replied, and for your honesty, I cannot accept that. You can. His phone buzzed inside his coat. He glanced at it, a brief flicker of attention, and then he stood. I have to go. Your change, Eleanor said. Keep it. He was already moving toward the door, the two men falling into position around him, with the practiced ease of people who had done this 10,000 times. At the threshold, he stopped. He did not turn fully, just enough. Eleanor. The way he said her name did something to the air in the room. Yes, be careful walking home tonight. The rain makes people drive carelessly. Then he was through the door and gone, swallowed by the dark and the rain, and a black vehicle that had been idling at the curb pulled away from the street with a quiet, muscular efficiency that made it look less like a car leaving and more like a large animal withdrawing. Maria appeared at Eleanor's elbow before the door had fully closed. Do you know who that was? Maria said. No. Maria's voice dropped to the register she reserved for things that mattered. That was Declan Rourke. Eleanor looked at the money on the counter. They say he controls the North Side ports. The old shipping families, the warehouse contracts, the clubs near the river. Everything you cannot verify, and everyone knows anyway. Maria paused. Men like that do not stop at places like this, Eleanor. And they definitely do not leave $500 tips. He was just a customer. Honey, Maria put her weathered hand over Eleanor's. Men like that are never just anything. Eleanor folded the bills into her apron pocket. They burned against her hip for the rest of the shift with the particular heat of something that does not belong to you and that you have decided to keep anyway. She counted the hours until her shift ended. She did not think about Declan Rourke. She thought about Declan Rourke constantly. The apartment was dark when she finally got home. Her two roommates were asleep, and she was grateful for the silence. She peeled off the uniform and stood under the shower until the water went cold, trying to wash off the grease smell and the bleach smell and the feeling that something had shifted in the careful, painful equilibrium she maintained day to day. She dried off. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 full seconds before she opened it. You made it home safely. Good. Her heart stopped, then restarted at a different speed. Who is this, she typed. The dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Someone who wanted to make sure you did not get hit by a careless driver. Eleanor stood up and went to the window. The street below was quiet, wet, the pavement reflecting the orange of the streetlights. 3 buildings down, a black vehicle sat at the curb with its lights off. How did you get my number, she typed. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. Fair enough, I asked your employer. She was cooperative, of course she was. Maria would hand over anything if Declan Rourke asked for it, with enough eye contact. Eleanor stood at the window looking at the car. She should call the police. She should block the number. She should do any of the several rational things a sensible person would do when a stranger with visible armed associates shows up at her workplace, tips her $500, and then texts her from outside her building. "This is inappropriate," she typed instead. "Yes," came the reply, simple and undefended. "Then why are you texting me?" A longer pause this time, a full minute. "Because most people lie when asked uncomfortable questions, and you told me the truth. Because you looked at that money like it was salvation and sin at the same time, and I have not seen that in a very long time. Because." The message stopped. She stared at the screen. Because she typed before she could decide not to. Another pause. "Because you are going to change everything, Eleanor, and I do not think either of us is ready for that." Her phone nearly slipped out of her hand. She stood at the window for a long time. Down the street, the black vehicle sat without moving. Eventually, she typed, "You should go. It is late." The reply came back in under 10 seconds. "You should sleep. You have another double shift tomorrow." She did. She had not told him that. "How do you know that?" "I know many things about you, Eleanor. Your schedule is the least interesting of them." She looked down at the car. Then before she could think about it too much, she raised her hand and waved. A pause, then the back window of the vehicle rolled down just enough. Even at that distance, even in the darkness, she recognized the shape of him. The window rolled up. The car pulled away. Her phone buzzed one last time. "Sleep well. I will see you tomorrow." Eleanor climbed back into bed and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, with a smile she could not explain and did not try to. She had just waved at a man she did not know from the window of her apartment at 2 in the morning, and the most alarming thing about it was how safe it had made her feel. She slept better than she had in 3 years. He came back the next evening. Not to the diner. A car appeared outside as her shift ended. A different driver, the same quiet efficiency, and a message on her phone that said simply, "I would like to take you to dinner if you will allow it." Eleanor stood on the sidewalk in her work uniform with her hair still smelling of coffee and considered the several excellent reasons to say no. She said yes instead. She did not change. She did not apologize for not changing. She climbed into the back of the car in her uniform with the small hole in the left shoe she had covered with a marker, and when she arrived at La Volta, a restaurant she had seen in magazines left on tables at the diner, she walked through the entrance beside Declan Rourke and did not look down once. The maitre d' went pale and then immediately elaborately helpful. They were shown to a private room in the back, all soft light, in white linen and in windows overlooking the city below. Crystal on the table. Classical music from somewhere she could not see. The kind of room that existed to make the world outside feel very far away. Eleanor sat down across from Declan and looked at the menu and did not react to the prices. She had gotten very good at not reacting to things she could not afford. "Order whatever you want," he said. "What I want is answers," she said. "I can eat anywhere." His mouth moved. That same controlled, almost smile. "Ask," he said. "Why me?" The words came out before she could dress them up. "You could have anyone. Women who know how to be in rooms like this. Women whose shoes do not have marker on them. So why a waitress from a 24-hour diner?" He leaned back in his chair. He was wearing charcoal tonight, a suit cut so precisely it looked like architecture rather than clothing. His silver ring caught the candlelight. "Do you know what I do?" he said. "I know what people say you do. And what do they say? That you own half of Chicago, the half that does not show up in the news." "Maria is being conservative," he said. He said it without pride, simply as a correction of the record. "I am surrounded every day by people who tell me what they believe I want to hear. People who rehearse their conversations with me, who perform. 3 nights ago, I had dinner with a woman who had spent 6 hours preparing. She said nothing real for 2 hours, and I would not have been able to describe her face the next morning." Eleanor waited. "And then I stopped at a diner at 2 in the morning because there was a meeting running late nearby, and a woman in a stained uniform told me her salary when I asked and looked at $500 like it was both the answer to a prayer and a thing she was not sure she should touch." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Honesty is cheap," she said. "Honesty is the rarest thing in my world," he said. "Worth more than anything you could put a number on." You have no idea what that makes you worth to someone like me. The waiter came. Declan ordered in Italian without consulting the menu, something fluid and quiet, and the waiter disappeared. They ate. The food was extraordinary in a way that made Eleanor close her eyes on the first bite, which she did not intend to do. When she opened them, Declan was watching her with an expression that had something warmer in it than anything she had seen on his face before. "Tell me something real about yourself," he said. "Small town girl," Eleanor said. "Comes to Chicago, discovers she has no particular skills that the city values, ends up serving coffee to people who do not look up from their phones." That is the whole story. That is not the whole story. It is the version that has been accurate for the last 3 years. He set down his fork. Something shifted in his expression. Some door opening slightly that she had not seen open before. "What happened 3 years ago?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I trusted someone I should not have," she said. "And when it ended, I was so convinced that the failure was mine that I spent a year apologizing for things that were not my fault, and 2 more years being invisible on purpose, because invisible felt safer than being wrong again." He was very still on the other side of the table. "I understand that," he said. "More than I would like to." "What happened to you?" He picked up his wine glass and looked at it for a moment. "6 years ago, he said, I lost someone. Someone I should have protected and did not. And since then, I have found it easier to control everything around me than to risk being unable to control what matters most." Eleanor looked at him across the candlelight. "That sounds like a very expensive kind of loneliness," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "It is," he said. "It is exactly that." They drove back to the penthouse in a silence that was not uncomfortable. The city moved past the windows. Eleanor looked at it and thought about what it meant to have spent 3 years making herself deliberately small. The penthouse was on the top 3 floors of a building she had seen from the bus, a tower of glass and stone on the north side that she had always assumed was full of people whose lives were nothing like hers. She had been correct about that. The interior was dark wood and leather, and clean lines, abstract art on charcoal walls, floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Chicago into something beautiful and distant. It was a place designed for control. Every surface exactly where it belonged. It felt exactly like him. They sat by the windows with water, because Eleanor said water was fine, and Declan did not push, and the city spread out below them like a map of a world she had been watching through glass for years without knowing how to enter. He told her about the organization: shipping contracts, port access, real estate protection, services. He said it plainly, without apology, without the performance of shame or the performance of pride. He told her that people were afraid of him and that he had worked to earn that fear because fear was a kind of order, and order kept certain things from becoming chaos. He told her that he had killed people. When she asked if it bothered him, he said it used to. She believed him on both counts. They sat in the dark for a long time talking about things neither of them talked about with anyone. She told him about Garrett, the man who had unbuilt her. He told her about Catherine, the woman he had not been able to protect. They did not perform grief at each other. They simply named it. At some point, the city had gotten quieter, and the conversation had thinned into comfortable silence. And Declan said, "Stay tonight. Guest room. In the morning, we talk more. If you want time after that, I will give it to you." Eleanor looked at him. "Just like that," she said. "Just like that." She stayed. The guest room was larger than her apartment. The bed had sheets that felt like cool water. She lay in the dark and thought about two people sitting on opposite ends of the same kind of loneliness and finding each other in it, and she thought that this was either the most dangerous thing she had ever done or the most necessary, and she was not certain those were different things. She slept better than the night before. In the morning there was coffee, waiting 2 sugars exactly right, and Declan was at the kitchen counter in dark trousers with his sleeves rolled to the elbows when she found her way there. He looked at her the way he had looked at her from the beginning, that specific assessing attention, and she had the sense again of being actually seen rather than merely observed. "Did you sleep?" he said. "Better than I have in years." The admission came out before she could measure it. "Good." He slid the coffee across the marble counter. She wrapped both hands around it. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask. You followed me for 3 weeks before you walked into the diner. I know because you know things you could not know from one conversation. So I need you to tell me the actual reason, not the flattering version." The true one. He was quiet, not the quiet of someone finding words, the quiet of someone deciding how many of the words to give. She set down her cup. I'm going to stand up now, she said. Sit down, he said. Tell me. He looked at her for a moment and something moved across his face that she was beginning to recognize, the very brief flicker that preceded something real. Sit down, he said. I will tell you one half today, the other half when you trust me enough to hear it. She did not sit immediately. She stayed standing and held his gaze and let him understand that she was sitting because she chose to, not because he had told her to. Then she sat. The diner, he said, has been used as a meeting point. A man I have been investigating for some time meets a contact there on a regular basis. I needed to know whether anyone on the staff was involved. I observed for 3 weeks. I determined you were not. He paused, and then I could not leave. Eleanor looked at him across the counter. Who is the man you are investigating? That is the half you hear later, he said. When you trust me enough, she turned that over. A man with this kind of power offering her half a truth and naming it honestly as half was in its way more honest than anyone who had offered her a whole truth that turned out to be constructed. I am not soft, she said. I need you to understand that. Whatever you think you saw in that diner, whatever you think I am not someone who needs to be managed or handled or decided for. I have been doing this alone for 3 years and I know how to survive. I know that, he said. It is the least interesting thing about you. She looked at him. What is the most interesting thing, she said? That you are still here, he said. After everything I just told you. She picked up her coffee again. I am thinking, she said, not agreeing. He almost smiled. The proposal came later that morning, not as a performance, not across a candlelit table, but in the kitchen, in the gray light coming through the tall windows, simply and directly. Marry me, he said. I will keep you safe. You will never work a double shift again. You will want for nothing. Eleanor set down her cup. That is not a marriage proposal, she said. That is a transaction. It is both, he said. I am not pretending otherwise. What do you get? Your honesty, your company, your complete trust in time. And if I disappoint you? Impossible, he said. Not flattery, statement. And if I am miserable, then we renegotiate. He held her gaze. But I am promising to make you so certain that you belong here that miserable becomes the last thing you would ever choose. That is arrogant. That is determined. There is a difference. Eleanor looked out at the city below. 26 years old. 2,000 a month on a good month. Shoes with marker on them. 3 years of making herself smaller and quieter and less present in her own life because someone had told her without words that she was not worth the full space she took up. She thought about the way he had looked at her across the diner with eyes that actually found something worth finding. She thought about sitting across from someone and saying true things into the dark and being heard. I need to think, she said. Think, he said. I will wait. She spent the afternoon walking along the lakefront in the cold with her hands in the pockets of her coat, watching the water move. She thought about the life she had been living and the life she had been pretending not to want. She thought about safety and what it actually meant, whether it was the absence of risk or the presence of something worth risking for. She came back at 4 in the afternoon and told him yes. The lawyers arrived within 2 hours. 3 men with briefcases, a woman who spoke in careful measured sentences about asset protection and terms Eleanor had to ask to have explained twice. They laid the documents across the kitchen table, and the woman explained each clause in patient detail. Eleanor read everything herself. She read slowly and she read twice, and when she reached the 3rd page, she took a pen from the table and drew a line through 2 clauses and wrote her corrections in the margin. The lawyers looked at each other. Eleanor looked at Declan. These 2, she said. I want them rewritten. He looked at what she had marked. He looked at her with something in his expression she had not seen before, an attention that was different from all the others. Done, he said. Aldous Crane, who had been standing near the window throughout and had said nothing since Eleanor arrived, turned to look at the city with the careful stillness of someone suppressing a strong feeling. Eleanor would learn later that he had leaned toward Declan and said very quietly, the last person who pushed back on the paperwork was Catherine. Declan had not replied to that either. Eleanor signed the corrected documents that evening. The next 3 days moved with a speed that felt dreamlike. A woman named Isabel arrived with dresses. Not the enormous white architecture Eleanor associated with weddings, but simple, clean things in ivory and champagne. She tried 7. The 8th was silk charmeuse in pale champagne that moved when she did and made her feel like a version of herself she had not met yet. That is the one, Isabel said barely above a breath. Declan appeared in the doorway. He looked at Eleanor in the dress, and the room seemed to go very quiet. He told Isabel to leave. She left with practiced speed. They stood alone, and he looked at her with the full attention she was beginning to understand was rare from him, the kind he gave nothing else. "You are beautiful," he said. "It is just a dress." "No," he said, "it is not." He reached out slowly and touched the strap of the dress at her collarbone, a single fingertip, brief and careful. Then he stepped back. "3 more days," he said. "Then you are mine to protect." On the morning before the wedding, a long black car pulled up outside the penthouse building, and Stranmorrow stepped out. Eleanor watched from the window of the guest room as Aldous went down to meet him. She had not been told anyone was coming. She watched Strand cross the lobby below, a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and the measured movements of someone who was always aware of where all the exits were. He was carrying a bottle of wine. He was smiling. She went downstairs. Declan introduced them in the main room. Strand, a business partner of many years. "Congratulations," naturally, he said to Eleanor and extended his hand. She took it. His handshake was warm and dry and perfectly calibrated, and his eyes, when they found hers, were doing a kind of mathematics that had nothing to do with pleasantries. It was not curiosity. It was the measuring look of someone calculating a variable they had not planned for, assessing what it meant for arrangements already in motion. Eleanor kept her face pleasant and open and filed that look away in the very precise part of her memory where she kept things that mattered. "Thank you," she said. "It is a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine," Strand said, and the ease with which he said it confirmed that he was a man who had spent a great deal of time saying things he did not mean. He stayed for 30 minutes. He was charming and warm and said several things that were almost funny, and left the wine on the counter and said he looked forward to knowing her better. When he was gone, Eleanor found Declan in his office. "Who is he?" she said. "Really?" He looked up from his desk. "An old partner," he said. "We have known each other a long time." She looked at him. "The way he looked at me," she said. "He was not pleased that I exist." Declan was quiet for a moment. "Strand does not like variables," he said. "You are a new one. He will adjust." Eleanor watched his face. There was something held back there, something behind the controlled surface that he was choosing not to give her yet. She remembered his words from the kitchen. "1 half today, the other half when you trust me enough." She filed that away too, next to the memory of Strand's eyes. After Strand left, Aldous drew Declan aside in the corridor and spoke very quietly. Eleanor, passing on her way upstairs, caught 3 words. The diner. Harlan. She did not stop walking. She did not change her pace, but she listened. "I know," Declan said, "not now." Not now was not never. She understood that, and she understood something else. The name of the diner she had worked in for 2 years. The diner where she had been invisible and exhausted and slowly becoming less of a person. That name was connected to something Declan knew and had not told her. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed in the beautiful guest room with her hands folded in her lap and thought about all the things she did not yet know and all the things she was choosing to trust anyway. She thought about the fact that trust was not the absence of doubt. It was the decision to stay in the room with the doubt and see what became of it. She thought about Strand's eyes. She thought, "I will need to watch that man very carefully." The wedding took place the following afternoon. The penthouse had been transformed. Flowers she could not name covered every surface, white and cream, and the pale gold of old paper, their scent thickening the air. Candles burned in the late afternoon light. People filled the main room, men in expensive suits and women in clothes that cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent, faces she did not recognize, and would spend the next several months learning. Aldous stood near Declan at the front of the room by the tall windows, with the city visible through the glass, like a backdrop painted just for this occasion. Isabel straightened Eleanor's dress one last time and squeezed her hands and left the corridor. Eleanor stood alone for a moment. She thought about the girl who had wiped that counter for the 3rd time in the rain. She thought about $2,000 a month and shoes with marker on the left toe and the way it felt to be looked through so consistently that you began to wonder if you were actually there at all. Then she walked into the room. Nobody walked with her. She had not wanted anyone to. Each step was hers, chosen deliberate. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something real is happening. She looked at Declan. He was standing at the window with his hands at his sides, and his face was doing something she had not seen it do before. All the control, all the careful surface, all the management of what he let show, it had come undone in a single moment, and what was underneath it was something very simple and very old. He was afraid she was not going to come, and she had come. He watched her walk toward him, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen on another human being, and she thought, this is real. Whatever else is true or not yet known, this part is real. The officiant began to speak. Eleanor waited perhaps 30 seconds and then said, I do. The officiant paused. I would like to finish the question first, he said with the gently amused expression of a man who had seen some things. Sorry, Eleanor said. But yes, whatever the question is, yes. Declan's smile broke across his face like something that had been held back for a very long time. And do you, Declan Rourke? Absolutely, he said. She is mine. Then by the authority vested in me. He kissed her before the sentence was finished. Not gently. The kind of kiss that is a statement, a declaration, a thing spoken in the only language that does not allow for performance. When he finally released her, the room was applauding, and she was breathless, and she had somewhere in the space of 3 days and a coffee and $500 on a rainy night become Eleanor Rourke. She stood in the circle of his arms with Chicago spread out behind them through the glass and felt for the first time in 3 years exactly where she was supposed to be. In the far corner of the room, in the middle of the applause, Strand Morrow raised his glass and smiled. His eyes above the rim of the glass found Eleanor's across the crowd. He was still doing the mathematics. She could see it from across the room. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds and then looked away, back to Declan, back to the city, back to the life she had just chosen. She already knew she was going to have to deal with Strand Morrow. She had known it since the moment she shook his hand. She just did not know yet how she was going to do it. She would figure it out. She was good at figuring things out. It was the one skill Chicago had not been able to take from her. The morning after the wedding, the city was still there, unchanged, indifferent, going about its business, the way cities do, regardless of what has happened to the people inside them. Eleanor stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows in the bedroom that was now hers and looked at Chicago and tried to understand that this was her life now. The bedroom was blue and silver, deep navy, and pale gray colors she had not chosen and that were exactly right. She had noticed that on the first night. She had not said anything about it yet. It was one of the things she was still turning over, the fact that he had known that he had arranged this room in her colors before she had ever agreed to anything, and that this was either the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her or evidence of a certainty about her choices that she had not been consulted on. Probably both. Most things with Declan were probably both. She heard him before she saw him. The quiet, measured sound of his footsteps in the corridor, the pause before the door, the way he knocked, even though this was his home and she was his wife, and knocking was not something he was required to do. She said, "Come in." He entered with 2 cups of coffee. He was already dressed, dark trousers, white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, the silver ring on his right hand catching the morning light. He looked as he always looked, like a man who had already been awake for several hours and had used them productively. He set her cup on the nightstand. 2 sugars. Exactly right. Always. She took it and wrapped both hands around it, and he went to stand at the other window, and they looked at the city together in the comfortable silence that had started to develop between them, the kind of silence that does not need to be filled. Aldous will take you wherever you need to go today, Declan said. If there is anything you want from your apartment, he can arrange it. Eleanor thought about the apartment, the moldy ceiling above the bathroom, the window that did not close all the way, the 3 girls she had lived with who were pleasant and distant and who would find another person to split the rent within the week. She thought about the things she owned that were worth taking and concluded that the list was short. Just the book, she said, and my grandmother's bowl, the blue one on the windowsill. He nodded. The rest, she said, I do not need. He looked at her with a warmth that was becoming familiar. something that lived beneath the controlled surface and emerged in the mornings before he had fully assembled his day. "You are not sentimental," he said. "I am very sentimental," she said, "about the things that deserve it." Aldous Crane appeared at 7:30 precisely, which Eleanor was beginning to understand was how Aldous appeared at things precisely without variation, as though lateness was a concept he had reviewed and declined. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that gave nothing away and eyes that missed nothing. He had been with Declan for 11 years. He treated Eleanor with a careful and genuine respect that told her he had made a considered decision about how to regard her and that the decision had been positive. He took her to the diner first at her request. She stood outside Harlan's for a moment before going in. The sign still buzzed. The same letters still flickered. She pushed open the door and the bell chimed, and the smell hit her coffee and grease and bleach, and for a moment the weight of it sat in her chest like something physical. Then she walked to the counter and told Maria she was leaving. Maria already knew. Maria had seen the news, had called twice, had sent a text that said, "Only I knew it. I always knew it." Eleanor hugged her over the counter, and Maria held on with the fierce grip of a woman who understood that some goodbyes mattered more than they appeared to. "Take care of yourself, honey," Maria said. "You too," Eleanor said. She was at the door when she stopped. She turned back. "Maria," she said, "the owner, Victor Harlan, what do you actually know about him?" Maria's expression shifted in a way that was hard to read, something cautious moving behind the warmth. "He bought the diner 4 years ago," Maria said. "Kept the name because the regulars knew it. Pays on time. Comes in twice a month, looks at the book sleeves. Not much to know, really." "Has he ever brought people here?" Eleanor said. "To meet. In the back booth, maybe near the end of the week." Maria was quiet for a moment. "There is a man," she said carefully. "Comes in on Thursday evenings, sits in the back. Victor comes in those evenings too. They never sit together, but they are always here at the same time." "What does the man look like?" older Maria said. "Silver hair, very well dressed, always orders the same thing. Black coffee, no food, stays about 40 minutes. Eleanor thought about silver hair and eyes that did mathematics. "Thank you," she said. She did not tell Aldous what Maria had said. Not yet. She was still assembling. The first weeks settled into a pattern that surprised her with its normalcy. She woke early. She had coffee with Declan before he went into whatever the day required of him, meetings. She was not part of calls in Italian and clipped English, a world of decisions and consequences that moved through the penthouse like weather. She spent her mornings reading, exploring the city, getting her bearings. She spent her afternoons with Aldous, who taught her things with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who believed preparation was a form of respect. He taught her to recognize when a room had been entered before her arrival. He taught her how to assess a space for exits. He taught her a handful of physical responses for close-range situations, taught them patiently and without condescension. And when she caught on quickly, he simply moved to the next thing without comment, which was the best kind of acknowledgement. He also, without being asked, began telling her small things about the organization. Not secrets, context. The difference between the people Declan trusted absolutely and the people he used because they were useful. The way decisions moved through the structure, who was consulted and who was simply informed. He told her these things the way you hand someone a map of a place they are going to be living in, practically because she would need to know. She listened carefully and remembered everything. Declan in the evenings began to open. It happened slowly, the way ice thaws at the edges first and then in deeper layers. He would come home late and find her reading and sit across from her without speaking for a while, and gradually the silence would shift into something else, and he would begin to talk. About Catherine, about what the organization had been when he inherited it at 24, too young, and not ready and unable to admit either of those things. About the 6 years of maintaining perfect control, because control was the only thing standing between him and the question of what he could have done differently. Eleanor listened. She did not offer comfort that was not real, and she did not fill the silences with noise, and she did not perform understanding. She did not feel. She simply listened and occasionally said something true back, and he would look at her with a softness he allowed only in these late-night hours, the version of him that existed before the day rebuilt its walls. 3 weeks after the wedding, on a Tuesday morning, Eleanor's phone lit up with a name she had spent 2 years training herself not to think about. Garrett Shaw. She looked at the name for a long moment. Then she set the phone face down on the counter and finished her coffee. He texted twice more that day. The third message said, "I saw the news. I need to talk to you, please." Declan was in his office when she went to find him. She stood in the doorway, and he looked up, and she said, "My ex is trying to reach me. He saw the wedding in the news, and now he wants to talk." Declan's expression did not change in any visible way, but she had learned to read the stillness. "I can handle it," he said. "I know you can," she said. "I am going to handle it myself." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "All right." She texted Garrett lobby of this address, tomorrow, 11. She did not sleep badly that night, but she did not sleep as well as she had been sleeping because Garrett Shaw was not a person who deserved significant real estate in her nervous system. And yet there he was taking up space the way he always had, not through force, but through the particular residue that certain kinds of damage leave behind. She dressed the next morning with more deliberateness than usual, not to impress, to remind herself of who she was now, which was not the person Garrett had known. He was already in the lobby when she came down. She saw him before he saw her and used those 3 seconds to observe. He looked good, she noted, without feeling the same careless handsomeness she had once confused for something that mattered. He had filled out slightly, was dressed better than she remembered. He had gotten his life together, she could see it in the way he stood, and she noted with quiet satisfaction that he had done it after not during not for her. Then he turned and saw her. She watched his face reorganize itself around surprise. The dress, the diamonds at her throat, the composed expression, the fact that she was not flinching or bracing or any of the things she used to do around him. And "Eleanor," he said. "Jesus, you look different," she said. "Yes." He crossed the lobby toward her, and she did not move, did not step back, simply stood in the center of the space and waited for him to come to her. Declan stepped out of the elevator behind her. She had not asked him to come down. She had not told him not to. He positioned himself near the far wall, arms loose at his sides, present without intervening a fact of the room rather than a participant in it. Garrett noticed him. A flicker of recalibration moved across his face, but he kept his attention on Eleanor. "I made a mistake," Garrett said. "I know that. I have known it for a long time, and I did not say it because I was an idiot, and I was young, and I was—" Eleanor let him finish. She waited for the silence after his last word to settle fully before she spoke. "You were not young," she said. "You were 25, old enough to know what you were doing. You knew exactly what you were doing when you brought her into our apartment. You knew I would find out eventually, and I think some part of you wanted me to find out because ending it cleanly would have required an honesty you were not willing to manage." He opened his mouth. She continued. "I spent a year after that believing the problem was me, that I was too boring, too ordinary, not enough of whatever it was you needed. I spent another year being invisible because visible had cost me too much. I shrank myself for 3 years, Garrett. I made myself smaller and quieter and less present in my own life because you told me without words that I was not worth the full space I took up." His face had gone through several things while she spoke. It landed on something that might have been genuine remorse or might have been the performance of it, and she found she did not particularly need to know which. "I am sorry," he said. "Eleanor, I am genuinely sorry. I know," she said, "and it does not matter anymore." She said it without cruelty and without anger, which was the most honest version of the truth. She had realized somewhere in the last month that what she felt for Garrett Shaw was not hate and was not love and was not even grief anymore. It was the faint recognition you feel for a place you used to live that no longer has anything to do with who you are. "I have a life now," she said, "a real one. And you were part of what it cost to get here, and I am done paying that particular price." Garrett looked across the lobby at Declan. "He is dangerous, Eleanor. I know what he is," she said. "And I know what you are. And I know the difference." She stepped back. "Go," she said, not with anger, simply with finality. Garrett Shaw looked at her for another moment, and whatever he was looking for he did not find, and then he turned and walked out through the lobby doors, and the sound of the city came in briefly, and then the doors closed again, and he was gone. Eleanor stood in the center of the lobby and breathed. Declan appeared beside her. He placed one hand on her shoulder, not gripping, just present. "Breathe," he said quietly. "I am breathing," she said. He turned her gently until she was facing him. I am proud of you, he said. She looked up at him. I did not do it for you, she said. I know, he said. That is why I am proud of you. She leaned into him for just a moment, her forehead against his chest, and felt him hold her with the particular care of someone who understood the difference between support and possession. Then she straightened. They went back upstairs, and she did not think about Garrett Shaw again. 4 weeks after the wedding on a Thursday evening, Eleanor was in the study off the main room, reading when she heard the elevator open and voices she did not recognize enter the penthouse. A meeting she had not been told about, which was not unusual. There were meetings she was not part of, and she had accepted the borders of that without needing them explained. She got up to get more water from the kitchen, which required passing the corridor near the main room. She almost did not see it. Jasper Finch was standing in the corridor outside the main room, slightly apart from where the voices were coming from. He had his phone out, and he was photographing something on the hall table, a document, a printed sheet that had been left there during the preparation for the meeting. His hands were steady, and his expression was neutral, and he was done in 4 seconds, and the phone was back in his pocket before Eleanor had fully registered what she was seeing. She continued to the kitchen. She filled her water glass. She went back to the study. She sat down and did not open her book. Jasper Finch had been with the organization for 8 years. He had attended Catherine's funeral. He had a daughter in college and a wife who taught 3rd grade, and a face so thoroughly ordinary that you remembered almost nothing about it except that it had been there reliably for a long time. Eleanor thought about the document on the hall table. She thought about the angle of the phone. She thought about the 4 seconds. She thought, how long has this been happening? She did not go to Declan that night. She needed to be certain before she said anything, because an accusation like this without evidence was a disruption, and a disruption without foundation could do damage she did not want to cause. She began paying attention differently. She was already good at watching. People had been good at it for years because in the diner you learned quickly that the most important information was rarely spoken. You learned to read what people showed when they thought no one was looking. She had spent 2 years watching truckers and businessmen and couples in various states of their relationships, and she had gotten very good at the gap between what people performed and what they actually were. She applied this to Jasper Finch. He was careful. He was very good. But he had a rhythm the way all careful people eventually develop rhythms, and once she identified the rhythm, you could see the shape of what he was doing. Information moved out of the organization on a roughly 48-hour cycle. Not always, not predictably enough to be obvious, but often enough and always after certain kinds of meetings or decisions. She needed to test it. She found her opportunity 2 weeks after the Thursday corridor incident. Declan mentioned casually over breakfast that a shipment transfer was being moved to a new time slot, a logistical change minor, the kind of thing that would pass through Jasper's awareness in the normal course of his work. Eleanor said nothing about what she was planning. She found Aldous alone in the afternoon and told him she needed a favor, that she needed kept between them for 48 hours. He looked at her steadily and asked no questions and said all right. She told him to watch the Thursday evening meeting point at the diner. The back booth. Silver-haired man, 40 minutes black coffee. 48 hours after the shipment time was discussed, Aldous reported back. The silver-haired man had been there. He had arrived 12 minutes earlier than usual. He had left after 22 minutes, not 40. Whatever he received had made the meeting shorter. Eleanor sat with that information for 1 full day. Then she went to Declan. She did not go to his office and knock and wait for permission. She opened the door and walked in and sat down across from him and said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen completely before you respond. He set down what he was reading. She told him everything. The corridor, the phone, the rhythm she had observed over 2 weeks, the false information about the shipment, Aldous in the diner, and the shortened meeting. She laid it out in sequence clearly, without emotional inflation, the way you present evidence, when you want it to land with its full weight rather than be filtered through feeling. Declan was very still while she spoke. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that she began to wonder if she had miscalculated something. Then he said Aldous. Aldous appeared in the doorway. He had obviously been close. Declan looked at him for a moment and then looked back at Eleanor. Call Finch, he said to Aldous. Tell him there is a meeting tonight. 7 o'clock. Aldous left. Declan looked at Eleanor across the desk with an expression she had not seen before. Not. The controlled surface, not the early morning warmth. Something beneath both of those, something stripped of all performance and entirely unguarded. How long did you know, he said. 2 weeks, she said. I needed to be certain. You did this alone. I did it alone because if I was wrong, I did not want the accusation to exist. And because I needed to know that the conclusion I reached was mine, not yours. He was quiet for a moment. You could have told me, he said. I know, she said. I chose not to. He looked at her across the desk in the quiet office with the city moving behind the windows, and she could see him making adjustments, recalibrating, integrating this new version of her into the framework he had been building. At 7 o'clock, Jasper Finch arrived at the penthouse for what he believed was a routine meeting about quarterly logistics. He sat down at the table in the main room and opened his laptop and looked up to find Declan on one side and Eleanor on the other, and Aldous standing near the wall, and something in the arrangement of the room told him immediately that the geometry of this meeting was not what he had expected. Eleanor placed the documented evidence on the table. The dates, the timing patterns, the 48-hour cycle mapped across 6 weeks, the result of the false information test. Finch looked at the papers. He looked at Declan. He looked at Eleanor. He did not try to explain it away. Eleanor had thought he might and had prepared for it, but Jasper Finch was at his core a practical man, and a practical man recognized when the mathematics of a situation had resolved definitively against him. He said, "How long have you known?" Eleanor answered because the question had been for her. She said, "I became certain 2 weeks ago." Finch looked at her with something that was not quite respect and not quite fear, and was in the space between them. He said he told me she would not pay attention, that the wife was decorative. That was the word he used. Eleanor held his gaze. Who, she said. Finch looked at Declan. Strand Morrow, he said. The name landed in the room with a weight that was different from sound. Declan did not move. His hands were flat on the table, and his face had gone to a place Eleanor had not seen before, something cold and specific and very old. How long, Declan said. 7 months, Finch said. He approached me after my daughter's tuition increase. He knew about it before I had told anyone. I do not know how he knew. Eleanor thought about silver hair and eyes that did mathematics. She thought about a man who collected information the way other people collected leverage because they were the same thing. What did he want, Declan said? Scheduling, movements, anything about the Northport negotiations. He said he only wanted to stay informed. He said nothing would happen to anyone. He said. Finch stopped. He said he had been patient for 6 years and he only needed a little more time, Finch said. 6 years. Eleanor watched Declan's face absorb that number and what it meant. 6 years was Catherine. 6 years was the accident and the grief and the years of maintaining control because control was the only thing left. 6 years was Strand Morrow being patient while Declan rebuilt and did not know who had been the reason for the rebuilding. The meeting ended. Finch was dealt with by Aldous in ways Eleanor did not ask about and did not need to know. What mattered was that the channel was closed. The rhythm was broken and Strand Morrow had just lost the one source of reliable information inside the organization he had cultivated for 7 months. He would know it within 48 hours. He would do something about it. Eleanor sat in the study that night while Declan made calls in his office, and she thought about the shape of what was coming. A man who had been patient for 6 years and had lost his only current advantage would not become cautious. Patience that long maintained that precisely meant a plan. A plan meant a next step that had already been decided. She thought about what she was and what she meant to that plan. She was new. She was unknown. She was the variable Strand had not accounted for and had underestimated and had now been surprised by twice. In her experience, the most dangerous moment with a certain kind of man was not when he held all the cards. It was when he had just lost one. Declan appeared in the study doorway at 11. He looked at her across the room. I owe you more of the truth, he said. She closed her book. He came and sat not across from her, but beside her, which was different, and he looked at his hands for a moment the way he did when he was deciding how to say something true. Catherine, he said, the accident. I have never been able to prove it was not an accident, but I have known for 5 years that it was not. He told her about the night before Catherine died. A conversation Catherine had tried to have with him, urgent, specific about something she had found in Strand's financial records. He had been distracted. He had told her they would talk in the morning. In the morning, Catherine was gone, and the records she had been looking at were not where she had left them, and Strand had been the first person to call, impeccably on time, perfectly grief-stricken, extraordinarily helpful with the arrangements. Eleanor listened to all of it. She said, "What did the records show?" "I never found them," he said. "Whatever she found had disappeared." Eleanor thought about a woman 6 years ago who had found something important and had tried to tell someone and had not been heard in time. She thought about what that woman might have done if she had known she was running out of time. She thought about the kind of person who documents things, who makes records, who thinks about the possibility that she might not be able to deliver the information herself, and so she needs to preserve it in a place where someone else might eventually find it. She did not say any of this yet. It was not fully formed. She looked at Declan beside her in the quiet study. She said, "Thank you for telling me." He looked at her with the open expression he was beginning to allow in these late hours. "You earned it," he said. She reached over and put her hand over his. They sat like that in the quiet for a long time, the city doing its slow, patient work outside the windows. And Eleanor thought about 6 years in patience and what it meant to finally understand the complete shape of something. She thought Catherine left something behind. Women like that do not disappear without leaving something. She did not know yet that she was right. She did not know yet that she was closer to it than she understood. She did not know yet that Strand Morrow was already setting his next move in motion, and that what he did next would force her hand in a way she had not fully prepared for. But she was beginning to see the shape of it, and seeing the shape of something was more than halfway to knowing what to do about it. She found out on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after the wedding, standing in the bathroom of the penthouse, with the door closed and Chicago 40 floors below, going about its enormous, ordinary life without any awareness of what had just changed inside this room. 6 weeks. She sat on the edge of the tub and looked at the result for a long time without moving. The light in the bathroom was very clear and very still, and the only sound was the distant murmur of the city and the particular quality of silence that descends when something true has just been confirmed. She was not afraid. That surprised her. She had expected fear to be the first thing, and instead what arrived was something quieter and more complicated, a kind of gravity, the sense of a new weight settling into the center of her life and reorganizing everything around it. She thought about Declan. She thought about Strand Morrow, who had just lost his informant 2 days ago, and who was already, she was certain, deciding what to do next. She thought about timing and what it meant that this particular truth had arrived at this particular moment. She put the test in the cabinet behind the mirror and closed it carefully and washed her hands and looked at herself in the glass for a moment. Same face, same eyes, though less tired than they used to be. Same freckles and the small scar above her right eyebrow from a fall at age 9 that her mother had called her permanent reminder to watch where she was going. She was going to watch where she was going. She was not going to tell Declan yet. Not because she did not trust him, because Strand still had people she had not identified. The channel Finch had used was closed, but she did not know yet if it was the only one. This information in the wrong hands at the wrong moment was a weapon, and Strand Morrow had already demonstrated that he collected weapons with patience and precision. Until she understood exactly what he was going to do next, she was not going to add this particular piece to the board where it could be used against them. She went to find Aldous. She found him in the small office near the service entrance, where he spent the early mornings reviewing the day's logistics. He looked up when she came in and closed the door, and something in the way she did it made him set down his coffee. She told him she needed him to watch the building entrances more carefully for the next several days. Not the usual watch. Something different, more detailed. Anyone who came twice. Anyone who stayed too long. Anyone whose reason for being there did not quite add up. He asked no questions. She went back to the main rooms and sat with her book and did not read it. Declan came home that evening from a meeting at the port offices and sat across from her in the study with the glass of water he had taken to drinking in the evenings. He looked at her. "You are thinking hard about something," he said. "I am always thinking hard about something," she said. "This is a different kind," he said. She looked at him across the room. She thought about telling him. She felt the pull of it, the desire to give him this, to watch his face change. Not yet, she thought. A few more days. "I am thinking about Catherine," she said, which was also true. He was quiet for a moment. "What about her?" Eleanor turned the thought over carefully. She was methodical, Eleanor said. She had found something important, and she was trying to get it to you, and she ran out of time. But a methodical person who is afraid she is running out of time does not simply carry important information in her head. She preserves it. Declan looked at her with a stillness that meant he was listening at the deepest level. I have looked, he said, after she died. Through everything, there was nothing. You looked in the places that made sense, Eleanor said. Where did she feel safe? What did she trust that no one else would think to look at? He was silent. Think about what she kept close, Eleanor said. What was irreplaceable to her that was also ordinary enough to go unnoticed. She watched him carry that thought out of the room when he went to bed, watched it settle into him the way a new weight settles, reorganizing what it touches. She sat alone in the study for another hour. Then she went to stand in front of the wall of photographs in the corridor near Declan's office, the ones she had walked past dozens of times without stopping. Photographs of the organization at various points in time, formal and informal, a visual history of the world Declan had inherited and built. She walked slowly along the wall and looked at each one. Catherine appeared in several, a woman with dark hair and clear eyes and the kind of face that suggested precision, that suggested someone who measured things. In one photograph, she was laughing at something off camera. In another, she was looking directly at the lens with an expression that Eleanor found for reasons she could not immediately name familiar. She looked like someone who was making sure she was recorded, who was aware of the camera, who was in that moment leaving a mark. In the background of that photograph on a shelf behind Catherine sat a small blue bowl. Eleanor looked at it for a long time. She went to bed. At 2:17 in the morning, 3 days after Jasper Finch had been removed from the equation, Strand Morrow made his move. Eleanor was awake when it happened. She had not been sleeping well for the previous 2 days, not from anxiety, but from the heightened alertness of someone waiting for a shape to complete itself. She heard Declan's phone ring in the bedroom, heard him answer it, the low-clipped exchange of someone receiving information that required immediate action. Heard him moving, getting dressed. She was already sitting up. There is a situation at the North Port, he said in the doorway. A problem with a transfer. It needs me there directly. Eleanor looked at him. How long, she said. 2 hours, maybe 3. Aldous will be here. He kissed her forehead and left. She sat in the dark for 4 minutes. Then she got up and went to find Aldous. He was in the front room, already positioned alert. He had the look of someone who had also been waiting. Who called him, she said. Aldous met her gaze. The call came from the port operations number, but the shift supervisor there is a man named Connolly, and Connolly does not come in until 6. His shift does not start for 4 hours. They looked at each other. This is the move, Eleanor said. Declan is being drawn out. Aldous was already reaching for his secondary phone. She said, wait, before you call him back, I need to know something. Is there anyone else in the building right now who should not be? Aldous went still in the way of someone cross-referencing information at speed. The service entrance, he said. There was a maintenance request submitted this afternoon for the elevator on the south side, approved through the building management system. But I did not approve it, and Declan did not approve it. How long ago did it come through? Submitted at 4:17 this afternoon, Aldous said, before Finch's removal became known to anyone outside this building. Eleanor thought about the mathematics of that. The maintenance request had been submitted before Strand knew Finch was burned, which meant this was not a response to losing Finch. This was part of a plan that had been in motion before that. Finch had been a secondary line. This was the primary. What is in the maintenance area on the south service level, she said. A room that accesses the residential floors directly, Aldous said, without going through the main lobby. How many people? He was already on the phone. 2, he said after a moment. Building ID cards issued 3 months ago to a maintenance company that does not appear in the city licensing records. Eleanor stood in the front room of the penthouse in the dark and thought about what Strand Morrow wanted from this and what shape the want took. He did not want Declan dead. Not yet. Declan dead without the port contracts transferred created a legal and structural problem that Strand could not simply step into. He needed something signed, or he needed leverage over something Declan cared about enough to sign away what Strand wanted. She was what Declan cared about. She thought, he is going to come here. She thought, I am not going to wait for him to arrive. She said to Aldous, I need you to do exactly what I tell you, not what you would do if Declan were here. What I tell you. Aldous looked at her for one full second. Then he said, all right. She told him to call Declan back, but not to tell him to return. Tell him the port situation was confirmed as a diversion and to stay exactly where he was and wait for her call. Do not let him come back early. She needed him away from the building for what she was about to do, not because she doubted him, but because what she needed now was not Declan's power. It was her own. Aldous made the call. She heard him deliver the message. Heard Declan's voice through the phone, low and controlled and asking questions. Heard Aldous say she asked me to tell you to trust her. A pause, then Declan said, all right. She exhaled. She told Aldous to let the two men from the service entrance come up, not to stop them, not to intercept them, to let them come to the penthouse door and then to open it and stand back. She positioned herself in the main room in the chair by the windows, in the full light of the lamps, and she waited. The door opened at 2:54 in the morning. Two men in maintenance uniforms stepped in and stopped when they saw her sitting there, not hiding, not panicked, simply present, looking at them with the calm expression of someone who had expected them. Behind them came a third person, not in a uniform, a man in a dark coat who had been waiting in the corridor, who had sent the first two ahead to confirm the space was controllable. Not Strand himself, someone who worked for him, someone whose job was to convey messages with the weight of the person who sent them. The man in the dark coat looked at her sitting in the light, and the calculation behind his eyes shifted. He had expected she understood to find her asleep, or frightened, or in the process of trying to reach someone for help. He had not expected this. She said, Strand sent you to give me a choice. The man in the dark coat was quiet for a moment. Then he said Mr. Morrow would like to discuss the Northport contracts. She said, I know what he would like. Tell me the terms. There were documents, the man said. He produced them from inside his coat. Transfer of the operational rights to the Northport facility and the associated warehouse contracts, signed by Eleanor Rourke as the authorized representative during her husband's absence from the premises. She would not actually have the legal authority to sign these documents on Declan's behalf. She suspected Strand knew this. The signature would not hold in any formal process. What it would do was give Strand something to wave at the Port Authority Board while he created enough disruption to install his own people in the operational positions before anyone could sort out the legal question. 48 hours of chaos was all he needed. She said, and if I do not sign, the man in the dark coat said accidents can happen to people who are not careful. Mr. Morrow would prefer not to have any accidents. He reached into his coat again and placed a second item on the table between them. A photograph. Eleanor and Declan leaving a restaurant 2 weeks ago. The angle was precise, professional, the kind of photograph that required planning and positioning, not opportunity. He has had someone watching you, the man said. He wanted you to know that. He wanted you to understand that he sees everything. Eleanor looked at the photograph. She looked at the man in the dark coat. I need 24 hours to consider, she said. The man looked at her. She could see him deciding whether this was stalling or something else. She kept her face even and her breathing slow and let him do his calculation. He said 24 hours? Then we return. Mr. Morrow is a patient man. He has been patient for 6 years, Eleanor said. I know. Something moved across the man's face. She said, tell him I know that. Tell him exactly that. The three men left. Aldous closed the door behind them and turned to look at her. 24 hours, she said, and I know where Catherine left what she found. She had known, she realized, for longer than she had understood. The photograph in the corridor, the clear-eyed woman who looked like someone who paid attention. The photograph in which Catherine was looking directly at the lens, aware of the camera leaving a mark. And in the background of that photograph, sitting on a shelf behind her, a small blue bowl. The same blue bowl Eleanor had asked Declan to retrieve from her apartment. The bowl her grandmother had owned. The bowl she had chosen out of everything she owned as the one thing worth keeping. Not her grandmother's bowl, Catherine's bowl, and Declan had brought it here without knowing what it contained. It had been sitting in storage for 6 years waiting. She went to find Aldous. She told him about the bowl. Not where she thought it was, but what she was looking for and why. He listened with the stillness of a man connecting things he had not previously connected. The storage room at the end of the north corridor, he said. He put things in there after she died. things he could not look at and could not get rid of. Eleanor went to the storage room. It was not large. Shelves of carefully boxed items labeled in Aldis's precise handwriting, the preserved evidence of a life that had been interrupted. She found the bowl on the second shelf wrapped in cloth. She lifted it and felt the weight of it, heavier than it should have been, and turned it over. The base had been sealed with a thin layer of material that matched the bowl's glaze, but was not original to it. Someone with steady hands and patience and time had sealed something inside the base and refinished the surface to be nearly undetectable. Nearly. Eleanor found a thin tool on the workbench along the wall and worked carefully at the edge of the seal until it released. A small USB drive fell into her palm. She stood in the storage room holding Catherine's answer in her hand and understood what it had cost to leave it there, to trust that someday someone would find it who knew what to do with it, to believe that the right person would come. She said quietly to the quiet room and to the woman who was not there, "I found it." She took it to Declan's computer. The files were organized with the same precision she had seen in Catherine's face in every photograph. Financial records, transaction logs, communication transcripts spanning 8 months before Catherine's death. Wire transfers between Strand's holding company and a series of accounts that connected through 3 layers of separation to the logistics company that had handled the transport contract for the vehicle that had failed on the roads 6 years ago. Not an accident, a contracted outcome, with the financial trail intact. She also found in a separate folder documentation of the Northport irregularities, the fraudulent subcontracting arrangements Strand had been using to skim from the operational budget for 4 years before Catherine found them. This was what Catherine had originally discovered. This was what had made her dangerous to him. Eleanor copied everything to 2 separate drives. She sat at Declan's desk in the quiet office at 4 in the morning and looked at the city through the window and thought about 24 hours and what they needed to accomplish. Then she called Declan. He answered immediately. He had obviously not slept. "Come home," she said. "Are you hurt?" "No, come home. I have something to show you." He arrived in 18 minutes. She heard the elevator and then his footsteps, and then he was in the doorway of the office and he looked at her, sitting at his desk, with the drive in her hand, and something in his face went very still. She told him everything. The bowl, the seal, the files. She told him methodically and completely, and she watched him the way she watched everything important closely and without looking away. He did not speak while she talked. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she could hear the buildings settle around them. Then he said very quietly she left it where I would have to heal enough to go looking. He meant that the storage room was where he had put the things he could not face, that accessing it required a degree of recovery he had not reached while he was alone, that Catherine had known somehow that someone else would need to find it, that the right person would come. Eleanor said nothing. She let him have that. After a moment, he looked at the drive in her hand, and his expression moved through several things and arrived somewhere she had not seen before. Not the controlled surface, not the early morning warmth, something harder and cleaner and very old, the expression of a man who has finally understood the complete shape of what was done to him and has decided what comes next. He said, "What do you want to do?" She had thought about this for 3 hours. She said, "Strand wants a signature on documents that are not legally binding in any way that matters. He wants 48 hours of disruption. He is not thinking past that because he has been patient for so long that the immediate victory is what he is focused on." Declan looked at her. She said, "I want to give him his meeting. I want to sit across from him with the evidence Catherine spent 8 months building, and I want to give him a choice. He signs the Northport contracts back to you fully and legitimately, and the evidence goes to the FBI in a form that documents the financial fraud, but does not include the transaction logs related to the accident. He goes to prison for fraud. He loses the port. He does not lose everything in the worst possible way." Declan was very still. She said, "Or he refuses and everything goes to the FBI and to the Federal Transport Authority and to the 3 investigative journalists whose contact information I found on Catherine's drive, because Catherine was thorough and she had already identified who to send it to, and Strand loses everything and faces the full weight of what he did 6 years ago." She paused. She said, "Either way, he loses. The question is how much we decide to leave him with." Declan looked at her for a long moment. He said, "You want to be in that room?" Yes, she said. He said, why? Because he called me decorative, she said, and I want him to understand in person that he was wrong. Something moved across Declan's face that was not quite a smile and was more than one. He said, Aldous will be outside the door. She said, I know. He said, if anything, I will have the second drive on me, she said. The meeting ends the moment I decide it ends. He looked at her across the desk in the gray early morning light. He said she would have liked you. Eleanor looked at the blue bowl sitting on the corner of the desk where she had placed it. She said, I think I would have liked her too. The meeting with Strand was arranged through the man in the dark coat who received Eleanor's message at 8 in the morning and whose response came back within the hour. Strand agreed to a meeting. He named a location near the river. Eleanor named a different location. The Penna House? Her ground. After a pause, Strand agreed. He arrived at 3 in the afternoon. He came alone, which did not surprise Eleanor when she thought about it. A man like Strand did not bring witnesses to conversations he intended to control. He was shown into the main room by Aldous, who then stepped back and closed the door from the outside. Eleanor was standing at the windows. She turned when he entered. He looked at the room, he looked at her. He looked for Declan and did not find him, and she watched him recalibrate around that absence. Mrs. Rourke, he said. His voice was warm and practiced and entirely false. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Sit down, she said. Something moved in his eyes at the directness of it. He sat. She sat across from him. Between them on the table were 2 folders. She did not open them yet. You sent men to my home at 3 in the morning, she said. A precautionary measure, Strand said, given the circumstances. The circumstance being that you lost your source of information inside the organization. He looked at her steadily. She said, how long did you think it would take before someone noticed the pattern? The 48-hour cycle. The information that moved right after certain specific conversations. He said Finch was careful. She said Finch was not the one I noticed first. It was you. At the diner. Thursday evenings. The same back booth. The same shortened meeting every time the information was particularly useful. Strand looked at her with an expression that had moved past warm and arrived somewhere more accurate. You are more observant than I expected, he said. Most people are more observant than you expect, she said. You have spent a long time surrounded by people who perform whatever you need to see. It has made you imprecise about what actual attention looks like. He was quiet for a moment. She opened the first folder. She said Catherine spent 8 months documenting the financial irregularities in the port subcontracting arrangements. She found the wire transfers. She traced them through 3 holding companies back to you. She built a complete record. She slid the top documents across the table. He looked at them. His face did not move, but something behind his face moved the way you see weather moving at a distance. She said she also found the transaction logs from the logistics company, the contract for the vehicle maintenance in the month before the accident, the payments made 4 weeks before, and the final payment made 6 days after. She slid those documents across. She said she left all of it in a place she knew he would eventually find. She trusted him to be the kind of person who would heal enough to go looking. She was right about that. She was right about most things. Strand looked at the documents on the table. He said, where is Declan? She said, not here. This is my meeting. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he reached into his jacket. Not quickly, deliberately. He produced his phone and placed it on the table between them, screen up. A name visible on the screen, a contact. His thumb hovered over it. A call he could make, the gesture said. People he could bring here. A different kind of conversation he could choose instead. Eleanor looked at the phone. She looked at him. She said, if that call goes out, both drives go to the FBI within the hour. Aldous is standing outside that door with instructions that do not require my continued presence in this room to execute. Strand's thumb did not move. She said, you have 2 options. The first is that you sign the Northport operational rights back to the Rourke organization fully and without encumbrance today, and the financial fraud documentation is submitted to the FBI in a form that reflects the port irregularities, but does not include the transaction logs related to Catherine. You go to prison for financial fraud, you lose the port, you come out with what is left. She let that settle. She said the second option is that I give the complete file to the FBI and to the Federal Transport Authority, And to the three investigative journalists Catherine had already identified as the right people to receive it. The accident investigation is reopened. Everything comes out. Strand looked at her across the table for a long time. He picked up his phone. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it back down on the table face down, and something in the gesture had a finality to it, a door closing, a decision made. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Eleanor could hear her own breathing steady, even unhurried. She did not feel it. She had learned from 2 years of watching people in a diner at 3 in the morning that the silence after a decision is sacred. It belongs to the person who made it. You do not crowd it. Strand looked at the documents one more time. Then he looked at her. Not with the calculating mathematics she had seen at the wedding. Something different. The look of a man who has arrived at the edge of what he built and understands perhaps for the first time its actual dimensions. He said Catherine was the only other person who ever sat across from me and made me feel that I had underestimated something fundamental. Eleanor said nothing. He said I should not have called you decorative. She said no, you should not have. He looked at the folder. He looked at the documents. He looked at the city through the windows behind her. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a pen. She slid the transfer documents across. He read them fully. She had expected him to. A man like Strand did not sign things he had not read. He took 11 minutes. She sat in the quiet and let him take them. Let him have those 11 minutes. They cost her nothing. Then he signed. She collected the documents and stood. He said one thing. She waited. He said he does not know what he has. I do not mean the port. She looked at him. He stood and buttoned his jacket with the automatic precision of a man whose manners were the last thing to go. He said she would have liked you, Catherine. She had the same quality you have. Eleanor said, what quality is that? He said the ability to be in a room with a dangerous man and make him feel that he is the one who should be afraid. He walked to the door. She said, Strand. He stopped. She said the FBI will receive the financial documentation this evening. Your counsel should be available. He nodded once. Then Aldous opened the door and Strand Morrow walked out of the penthouse and out of their lives, and the door closed behind him. Eleanor stood in the center of the room. She breathed. She placed both hands flat on the table, not for support, but as a deliberate gesture, grounding herself in the physical reality of the moment. The documents were in her hands. The port was back. Catherine's file was complete and would reach the people it needed to reach. The person who had spent 6 years being patient while Declan rebuilt without knowing who had made the rebuilding necessary was gone. The door opened and Declan was there. She looked at him across the room. He said, Aldous told me. She said, I know. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her and looked at her face the way he always looked at her, reading. What was there, not filtering it through what he wanted to find? He put his hands on her face, both of them careful. She put her hand over his. She said, I need to tell you something. He waited. She said, I found out 6 weeks ago. I did not tell you because the timing was wrong and I needed to be certain about Strand first, and I needed to do this myself first. Do you understand that? He looked at her steadily. She said, we are going to have a child. The room was very quiet. She watched his face the way she always watched important things closely without looking away. She watched the controlled surface go and the careful attention go and everything managed and everything held back. Watched all of it simply dissolve the way ice goes, not all at once, but completely, until there is nothing left but the water underneath. He made a sound that was not a word. He put his forehead against hers and she felt his hands, the scarred knuckles and the silver ring, and the warmth of them pressed gently against her face, and she felt his breath unsteady for the first time since she had known him move against her skin. He said, Eleanor. She said, I know. He said, I. She said, I know. He stepped back just enough to look at her, and his eyes were bright in a way she had not seen before. He lowered himself slowly until he was kneeling in front of her, not performing, not theatrical, simply putting himself at the level of the thing that mattered most. And he placed his hands over hers where they rested at her sides. He stayed there for a long time. She put her hand in his hair. Outside the window, the city moved and breathed and did its vast business, millions of lives playing out in those lit windows. And inside the penthouse, a man who had spent 6 years maintaining perfect control, because control was the only thing standing between him and the question of what he could have done differently, was kneeling on the floor of his own home, with his eyes closed and his shoulders shaking, with the specific relief of someone who has been given back something they had concluded they did not deserve. He said against her hands, "I am afraid." She said, "I know. So am I." He looked up at her. She said, "We will figure it out the same way we have figured out everything else." He said together. She said together. 9 months moved through Chaco the way time moves when it is carrying something. Winter came and went. Spring arrived with the particular brightness that follows a long gray season, cold and brilliant and startling. Eleanor's body changed, and she observed the changes with the same careful attention she brought to everything, noting and adapting, learning this new version of herself, the way she had learned the penthouse and the organization and the man who moved through it. Declan learned her rhythms the way he had learned everything she showed him, completely and without reservation. He was present in the specific way of someone who had decided that presence was the most important thing he could offer. He did not hover. He did not manage. He simply made sure she had what she needed and then stood back and let her be the person she was. Aldous taught her 3 more things in those months and then stopped pretending it was about practical training and admitted it was because he genuinely enjoyed her company and found that teaching gave him something to do with his hands during the long afternoons. The FBI received Catherine's documentation. The investigation moved at the speed institutions move, which is slow, but it moved. Strand was indicted 7 weeks after the meeting in the penthouse on 14 counts, and his counsel was available as Eleanor had suggested. The Northport returned to full operational control under the Rourke organization. Declan began the process of transitioning the most problematic elements of his holdings toward legitimate operations, not because he was required to, not because anyone had asked, but because he had decided one morning, watching Eleanor read in the study with her feet tucked under her and the winter light pale outside the window, that he wanted to build something he could show their child without explanation. He told her this on a Tuesday evening. She looked at him over her book. She said, "That is the right decision." He said, "I know." She said, "I know you know." He almost smiled. Stella Rourke arrived on a Thursday morning in October in the private maternity facility on the north side, 7 pounds and 3 ounces, and dark hair that was exactly Declan's, and eyes that were Eleanor's, the gray-blue of early morning before the sky decides what it is going to be. She was perfect. The nurse placed her in Eleanor's arms, and the room, which had been full of controlled professional activity for several hours, went quiet in that specific way. Rooms go quiet when something has just become permanent. Eleanor looked at her daughter. She looked at the tiny face, the closed eyes, the small mouth that was already working at the air with the industrious concentration of a person who intended to be here and intended to make that known. She said hello. Declan was beside her. He had been beside her for 8 hours without complaint, without checking his phone, without doing anything except being present in the way he was best at when he chose to be. He looked at Stella with an attention so complete and so unguarded that Eleanor felt she was seeing something private, something that had been locked away for a very long time and was only now finding its way out into the light. "She is so small," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "She is exactly right," Eleanor said. He reached out with one hand very slowly, the most careful motion she had ever seen from him, and touched the back of Stella's hand with one fingertip. Stella's fingers moved, the reflex of the newborn reaching without knowing they are reaching, closing around whatever is offered. She closed her fingers around his. Declan made a sound that was not a word. Eleanor watched his face. All of it went, everything held, and everything managed, and everything that 6 years of necessary control had built across his expression. All of it released in one moment, and what was underneath it was something very young and very old. At the same time, something that had been waiting in him for longer than either of them had understood. He was crying, silently without performance, in the way of someone who has not done this in a very long time and whose body has remembered how before his mind caught up. Eleanor put her hand on his arm. She said, "Declan." He could not speak. She said, "She has your hair." He laughed, which broke through the tears in the way laughter sometimes does when feelings arrive all at once and the body cannot sort them fast enough. He said, "She has your eyes." "What should we call her?" Eleanor said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at their daughter in Eleanor's arms, at the small, serious face, at the fingers still wrapped around his. He said, "Stella. It means star in Italian. My mother used to say it sometimes." as a word for something small and bright and worth protecting. Eleanor looked at her daughter. She said Stella Rourke. He said Stella Rourke. She tested it against the quiet room and the morning light coming through the window and the weight of her daughter in her arms. She said it is exactly right. Her phone was on the table beside the bed. She reached for it with her free hand and found Maria Stanton's number. She typed, "She is here. Her name is Stella. She is perfect." 3 minutes passed. Maria replied, "I always knew you were not just a waitress, honey. Give that baby all the love in the world from me." Eleanor set the phone down. She looked at Declan beside her, this man who had walked into a diner in the rain, and looked at her like something worth looking at, who had told her half a truth, and then the rest of it, who had kneeled on the floor of his own office and shaken with something that was not grief and was not joy and was both of those things, who was sitting now with his daughter's fingers wrapped around his and his face completely open for the first time in 6 years. She thought about the girl who had wiped that counter for the third time in the rain. She thought about $2,000 a month and shoes with marker on the left toe and 3 years of being invisible on purpose because visible had cost too much. She thought about what it had taken to become visible again. Not Declan, not the penthouse or the diamonds or the signed transfer documents or any of the external things. What it had taken was a choice. Made at 2 in the morning at the window of a moldy apartment, watching a car drive away, raising her hand and waving at a man she had just met because something in her had decided before the rest of her caught up that she was done cooperating with her own disappearance. Everything after that had been the consequence of that one choice. She looked at Chicago through the hospital window as the city woke to another morning. The streets filling slowly with people starting their days, chasing their lives, surviving their struggles. Somewhere out there, she thought another girl might be wiping a counter for the third time, telling herself she was fine, telling herself that 2,000 a month was life and life was what you accepted. She thought, "I hope someone walks through that door." She thought, "I hope she does not wait to be rescued. I hope she decides first." Declan's hand found hers across the bed, his thumb tracing the familiar circles on her palm. She looked at him. He said, "What are you thinking?" She looked at their daughter, at his face, at the morning light doing its patient work on the city outside. She said, "I am thinking that safety is not the absence of risk. I am thinking that being seen completely, all of it, the worn shoes and the true answers and the fear and the stubbornness and the things you have buried because hoping for them costs too much, being seen, all of that, and still being chosen, that is the only kind of safety that is actually real." He looked at her. She said, "I am thinking that I raised my hand and waved at a stranger in the dark, and it was the bravest thing I had ever done. Until today." He said today was braver. She said today was the result of then. He brought her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The same scarred knuckles she had noticed on the very first night, fighter's hands in a gentleman's coat. And now she knew the full weight of what those hands had carried and what they were capable of protecting. He said, "Thank you, Eleanor." She said, "For what specifically?" He said, "For staying in the room with the doubt, for choosing this when you did not have to, for finding what Catherine left and doing what she would have done with it, for sitting across from a dangerous man and making him understand he had made a mistake." He paused. He said, "For waving." She smiled. She said, "You caught me." He said, "I will always catch me." She looked at their daughter, at the small, sleeping face, at the fingers loosening around Declan's, as sleep pulled Stella further down into the warm dark of her newest and most ancient instinct. Outside the hospital windows, Chicago had fully woken. Streets filling with Thursday traffic people, heading somewhere with purpose, the whole enormous machinery of a city in motion. Inside, in the particular quiet of a room where something new had just begun, two people sat with their daughter between them and did not need to speak. Eleanor thought, this is what it means to stop disappearing. This is what it means to take up the full space you were given. This is what it means to be seen. 3 years ago, she had been a ghost in a stained apron, surviving on scraps and prayers, and the careful management of expectation. She had made herself small because small felt safe, and safe felt like the best she could hope for. She had been wrong about that. Because sometimes salvation came in unexpected packages. Sometimes it wore expensive suits and carried old damage in its hands and offered you a transaction that was also underneath the transaction, something else entirely. And sometimes when you were brave enough to accept impossible offers and honest enough to mean it, When you said yes, you discovered that the cliff you had been standing at the edge of was not a fall at all. It was the beginning of flying. I love you, she said quietly against the sound of the city waking up and her daughter breathing, and the particular quality of light that belongs only to October mornings in Chicago, when the sky is very clear and very blue, and everything looks for a moment exactly like it should. His arms tightened around her. He said, I love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anything. She said even more than the port. He said infinitely more than the port. You and Stella are my real empire, Eleanor. Everything else is just management. She laughed. It was the right word and the wrong word, and completely exactly him. She leaned back against his shoulder and looked at her daughter and at the city and at the morning and thought that a girl who had spent 3 years being invisible had learned something that all the careful, painful management of expectation could not have taught her. Being seen was worth the risk. Love could exist even in darkness. And happy endings were not reserved for people who had done everything right. Sometimes they belonged to waitresses who said yes to impossible offers, to women who chose uncertain futures over comfortable misery, to survivors who had learned that safety was not found in invisibility, but in being claimed so completely that the entire world had to acknowledge you existed. She was Eleanor Rourke now, wife-mother, the woman who had found what Catherine left, the woman who had sat across from Strand Morrow and watched him choose correctly, the woman who had waved at a stranger in the dark. And for the first time in her entire life, she was exactly where she belonged.